Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto Willis. Welcome to another edition of Egberto Off the Record. Today, we are honored to have with us Greg Palast. Greg Palast is known for his investigative reports for The Guardian and bestsellers, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Greg Palast's new film about the latest attacks on the right to vote that bent this election. It's called Vigilantes, Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitmen, narrated by Rosario Dawson and produced by Martin Sheen, Leonardo DiCaprio. It has released the film for free streaming at gregpalast.com. Hey, Greg, how you doing this morning?
Glad to be with you again, Egberto.
Well, you know, I always like to interview because you always have something new for the audience. And this time around, it's a blog piece that you wrote that I want to say tickled my fancy. You wrote a piece titled, I was on the phone with RFK Jr. when he lost his mind. And I don't want us to get into this immediately because I want to get a few more people on beforehand. So why don't you tell a little bit about your experiences and what you do, and then we'll get into that specific blog afterward.
Okay, for those who don't know Greg Palast, you can tell by my hat that I'm an investigative reporter, which I did for many years for The Guardian out of England, BBC Television, Rolling Stone. And now, by the way, I'm now a columnist with Raw Story. But you can find all my reports at gregpalast.com. Now, many of you know me from the best-selling book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, the film of the same name. And right now, we've got this film out, which you can stream for free on either YouTube or just go to gregpalast.com and get the links there. And, you can get my investigative reports. Now, the film Vigilantes is about something very, very dangerous, important, scary, and frightening that's going on right now under Agent Orange, your president, which is that the laws in many states, including Georgia, and they're trying to expand this everywhere, allow for individuals, vigilantes, self-appointed vote fraud hunters, to challenge people and say, you can't vote. Now, understand, this was a plan first adopted by the Ku Klux Klan in 1946. So Trump and his gang are using a Ku Klux Klan method that where in 1946, the Ku Klux Klan in Georgia incorporated itself as Vigilantes, Inc. And what they did was they went around and challenged every black person on the voter rolls. They filled out challenge forms. Don't let Egberto Willis vote because he's not a legal voter. Well, they've now taken the white sheets, they put them into spreadsheets, and now Jim Crow's gone onto cyberspace. So the Trump organization, True the Vote, the Trump-allied organization, True the Vote, they're the ones, by the way, Charlie Kirk was part of that organization. What they did was come up with lists of literally millions of people, overwhelmingly people of color, to challenge their vote. In other words, Greg Palast can say Egberto Willis shouldn't be allowed to vote. Then Egberto has to go into an office, county office, to prove you're a citizen and prove you live where you live, and then they'll let you vote. And so in the film, Vigilantes, I have, for example, Major Gamaliel Turner. He's the top Pentagon consultant. He was assigned to base in California. They didn't send him his ballot from Georgia, and an African-American officer, they refused because they said, Mr. Turner, when he called and said, where's my absentee ballot? They said, you've been challenged. He said, well, what do I do? He said, no problem. You just come into our offices. He said, so wait a minute. I have to go 2,500 miles from California to get my ballot? You talk to fools like that. He says, I know what you're doing. Of course he knows what he's doing because his father was the co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference with Martin Luther King. So it's this mass challenge. He and 4,000 others in the Fort Benning area, mostly black soldiers, were denied their ballots and could not vote in the Georgia elections. And this is one of the big reasons why Trump, after losing Georgia, then he wins it because they literally removed voters by the thousands and thousands and thousands. And that was the margin for Trump in Georgia. And that was the margin, and they've taken this operation to Florida, everywhere else. So if you want to see the film, it's entertaining. Grab some popcorn hey, you can't lose. Rosario Dawson is narrating. That alone should be exciting enough. And introduced by Martin Sheen, my favorite president, President Bartlett. And just go to gregpalast.com and get the story.
So check that out, guys. Check that out. But anyway, today, however, and I think your assistant put the link to the blog that you wrote at gregpalast.com called "I Was on the Phone with RFK Jr. When He Lost Your Mind." I mean, let me tell you something, Greg. Talking about titles of blog posts, you know how to do it, brother, because I am scrolling through all the stuff that I read every day. And as soon as I got to that title, it was like capturing, and I had to read it. Tell us a little bit about you, before you talk about specifically that incident. You worked with RFK Jr. on quite a few things. Tell us a little bit about that.
For years, Bobby Kennedy, Bobby was my co-author and partner and friend. And we wrote articles for Rolling Stone together. He introduced my books. He wrote a chapter for one of my books. We even did, with Jesse Jackson, we did the number one best-selling comic book in America, adult comic book for a while, which was Steal Back Your Vote, on protecting your vote. Very progressive. He's a leader of the environmental movement, a professor of environmental law at Pace University. Sharp guy, very, very progressive, and very brilliant. And I was very happy to work with him as a co-author, and we worked on these activist issues in environment, voting rights, you name it. He was on my program on BBC television quite often. I brought him in as a guest. So we were close, we hung out, and then things went bad.
Now, I think you said you noticed it first went bad for that big explosion from BP, I think, in the Gulf of Mexico, right?
Yeah. So what happened was, and this was one incident, but it was kind of one of the final incidents. Something seemed to be going wrong with his brain. By the way, just so you know, it's not very comfortable to talk about your friend's mental problems. I mean, who does that? But in his case, he's inviting America to participate in his psychosis. He is harming people. You have to understand the stakes here. Otherwise, I would not be talking to you about my friend. But when you kill, he didn't just kill off vaccines. People are so focused on that. He stopped all the research on the mRNA, not only vaccines, but mRNA
research. Yeah.
All the research. Now understand, mRNA was our way to get a possible vaccine to stop cancer. We finally had something that looked like a cancer vaccine. And this guy literally, he didn't say, well, the research shows that it's dangerous or bad or not effective. He simply stopped the research. What are you afraid of, Bobby, with research? We're losing thousands of scientists. This is dangerous. And I got to tell you, look, I'm going to be honest. I'm in my 70s. I know I look like I'm in my 20s, but hey,
you're
I'm in my 70s. I have one lung. If I get COVID, without a vaccine, I'm a dead man. So, Bobby, you are putting my life in danger. You're putting a lot of people's lives in danger. 1 million people died in America from COVID because we had a president telling people to drink bleach and whatever, and use something called ivermectin, like quack stuff. People died because of this. And I'm very, very concerned. So that's why. Now, going back to your question, when I first started noticing, when it really got really bad, when it really hit the final point, if you remember, there was an explosion in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deepwater Horizon. A British petroleum rig blew up in the Gulf and incinerated 11 people. We smeared 1,500 miles of coast with the oil. It was a horror show. And what I found out is working for British outlets, The Guardian and Channel 4 Television Britain, I uncovered that, in fact, British Petroleum had the same explosion. And if you go to my book, Vulture's Picnic, you go to my website, you'll see it. The same explosion happened on a BP rig in the Caspian Sea, but they covered it up. And in fact, the executives from the oil companies like Exxon and Chevron and British Petroleum told the United States Congress they'd never had a blow up. They never had a blow up until the Deepwater Horizon. That's not true. 17 months before, they had the same exact thing. They covered it up. It's a hell of a story. We put it on prime time air in Britain and all over the world. It was in, top of the news in France and Switzerland and Italy and, like I say, the UK, South America. It never made it into the United States.
Well, let me stop you
Except
there.
on one.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Why didn't that story make it here in America? That news story.
Because they were doing their best to cover up for these oil companies. Our Secretary of State,
Right.
Condoleezza Rice, covered up the story of the explosion. Remember, Chevron named it an oil tanker after her. So they covered it up. And I found out some of this information, by the way, from insiders, but also WikiLeaks. And was confirmed by looking at State Department cables that they knew about the explosion and the State Department covered it up. So, but here's the point about Bobby. He knew all about the story. He was working with me on it. He actually got on BBC television worldwide to talk about the case. He reviewed my book, and I did get into the United States on a program called Ring of Fire. It was Bobby Kennedy, and we were on the air an hour talking about this, and my book Vulture's Picnic, which had the story in it, and then we were supposed to have a press conference about it, and then Bobby calls me from California. He's in his convertible with Cheryl Hines' wife, and says, "Greg, I'm canceling the press conference because apparently this story you put this story out before." I said, "No, Bobby, we put it out. You and me. Remember, we were on the air for an hour, and then we were on BBC television when you wrote about it and you talked." I mean, Bobby, do you remember? And he doesn't remember anything. And this kept happening where just basic things that were very, very strange, where it seemed like his brain was going off. Now, what I didn't know is that he had an actual live worm in his brain, eating away at his brain. Now, look, I don't speak worm. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if what that meant in terms of his mental condition. I also know, look, let's face it, this guy's had traumatic life. Trauma, yes, he's privileged as a Kennedy, but his head blown off on television. His son died, his wife, and I think the real thing that broke him, and I'm not a psychologist, but I could see it as a friend when his wife committed suicide. She called him up, and right after they spoke, she killed herself, and she had severe problems. I won't go into it; it's personal. She hung herself. It was horrible. And Bobby was blamed in the tabloids. So imagine you're going to your wife's funeral, the mother of your children, and you open the tabloids and they talk about how you killed your wife. I mean, and his kids have to read that stuff. So, you can imagine. So he's had a lot of trauma. He has good reasons to have psychological problems. The worm, I don't know what else. But Bobby, you have no right to impose your psychosis on the nation. And it is psychosis. And I'm very deeply disturbed. And so, can we really have someone with deep psychological problems like this in charge of our nation's healthcare system? People are dying. You're cutting off research. You're firing everyone on the vaccine committees, on the research committees. This is dangerous stuff. And of course, by endorsing Trump, he's endorsed everything he ever fought against.
Exactly.
Look, Trump is undoing all the environmental laws that Bobby fought for. He's undoing all the global warming. To Bobby Kennedy, the issue of global warming was paramount. And now he's joined up with Agent Orange to say, well, let the planet burn. Bobby, what's happened to you? And I was at a Trump rally in Georgia. And, you had all these, I hate to say white Georgians who tend to be largest station wagons, and they're all with their MAGA stuff. And then there's a little group of skinny vegans who have a little tent, and they were the Bobby Kennedy contingent. Make America Healthy Again. They had chin-up bars and exercise bicycles for the Trumpsters who were eating their deep fried Snickers bars. And I said, why should we vote for Bobby Kennedy? Or why should we, accept his choice of President Trump? And they said, well, he can do 30 chin-ups. And I said, I didn't know that was a qualification, but I could do 30 chin-ups if I did as many steroids as he did. That's the other problem, is that Bobby's against anything in a needle unless it's a steroid. And, I'm sorry, Bobby. I've seen him. What happened to you? He was always a strong guy, very athletic, no question. But now he's a cartoon. And you're not going to tell me that doesn't come out of a needle. I don't buy it, Bobby. You know what? You hang out with Joe Rogan, Mr. Steroid. I don't buy it at all. So, it was very frightening to see him do this crazy stuff. And I have to call him out. Bobby, you are not fit for office. You're not
You know,
fit for office.
what you just pointed out as far as what you found with him and the state that you actually saw him with, the mental state that you saw him with, and that the president of the United States also saw him fit to represent HHS, which had CDC and everything else under him. That's a problem. But then again, when you look at who our president is, it almost seems like we're completely governed by crazies.
Well, it's beyond crazy. It's vicious.
Yes, that
For
too.
example, the indictment of Comey. That's sick. And you do it. One thing, I'm sure it's been done before where a president calls his attorney general and said, I want that guy indicted. But he actually ordered his attorney general to indict an American citizen, former head of the FBI, but an American citizen on a tweet on his semi-truth,
Yeah.
saying, ordering his attorney general to fire the prosecutor, who, by the way, was a right-wing Republican who was very, very MAGA himself, but he said there's no evidence, to fire him and then indict. And in 2 days, with a brand new prosecutor, took an entire 2 days after they did 2 years of research on this matter. And in 2 days, they indict an American citizen on the orders of the president. That is fascism. I don't throw that word around easily. That's dictatorship, when someone can point at you and say, Berto Willies, I want that guy indicted. Now, Comey's high enough profile that he'll be able to stop this. Look, he's not without his resources. I mean, Trump has swallowed the grenade on this one, I think. But
don't you find it ironic that the guy who probably allowed the election of Donald Trump, probably stewarded the election of Donald Trump with what he did to Hillary right at the end of that campaign, that Donald Trump turns around and does this to him? Is that ironic or what?
Well, it's ironic. I mean, by the way, I don't think that Comey did anything wrong by releasing information. We don't want information secret before an election.
True.
And I don't think, by the way, I don't think in Michigan, which, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania were the deciding
There are some other things
I
there,
don't
yeah.
remember anyone in those states talking about Hillary Clinton or her emails. That wasn't the issue.
Right.
In those states, it was more NAFTA. But nevertheless, there's no indication anywhere that Comey is some type of remember, by the way, Comey's a Republican. He's a registered Republican.
Yes,
That's
he
the
is.
irony of all this.
And a very conservative one.
Yeah. And so what's happening is that Trump is angry at the people he appointed, like Jerome Powell. People forget he's the one who put Powell in. He removed, he removed Janet Yellen, brilliant economist. And ironically, Janet Yellen was for lower interest rates. So he puts in Powell, who's for higher interest rates. And now he's screaming about Powell. Well, buddy, that was your choice. But that's about policy. I'm talking about personal attacks, vicious. Now, it's hard for him to go after Comey, but he might go after Egberto Willies next. It's like the McCarthy era. You pick out some high-profile people, you destroy them, then you go after people en masse that no one's ever heard of, but they all lose their jobs. You're going to see hundreds of professors fired. You're going to see organizations shut down, and I don't know how long you are going to be able to continue.
We are actually,
that's no joke.
That's what I like to tell the audience. Let me tell you what, there was a conservative commentator last week that I was about to get a clip of what she said, and she said, well, we've already lost the mainstream media. The mainstream media has already acquiesced to what Donald Trump wants them to do. And she said the only thing standing now is what we do, independent media. And the thing about it is Donald Trump put a test out there after Charlie Kirk's murder. And what he did is he wanted to see, and it's done through his minions, of course, he wanted to see how people were going to respond to all the firings that are occurring. You say something, who the hell is Charlie Kirk? I mean, I'm sorry, I do not justify his murder or anything. I do not. But that said, why is a professor saying something about Charlie Kirk, pointing out how the despicable character that he was? Why does that sanction that professor being fired? And they've done it with professors, they've done it with environmental, they've done it with just about everybody in every profession where we find people now scared to speak. Bobby Kennedy, you speak up again. I mean, they're doing a whole lot of things right now. And the only solution, as I've been preaching and others have been preaching, I've heard Tom Hartman talk about it as well, is we cannot give in and we cannot shut up. Continue, my brother.
Well, yeah. I mean, we can't shut up, but they can shut us up. They can shut us down. I mean, by the way, if you do go see my film or download it, stream it, Vigilantes Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitmen, you will see Charlie Kirk, who's part of a group that, when I talked about those vigilante attacks, he was part of the group mounting the attacks on voters of color, this Ku Klux Klan plan of mass challenges. Understand, by the way, and so you don't consider that hate speech? I don't know. How about hate action? How about just pure vicious racism and fraud against voters? There's not voter fraud.
Greg, it was unadulterated
fraud against
hate. Yeah, it was unadulterated hate. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it hate or you can call it, I don't know about his emotions, maybe even worse. I don't know if he hates anyone. I think he just wanted people of color off the voter rolls because their color tends to be blue when they vote. So that's how it works. You know, it's like, that's his objection. I don't think he hates black people. I think he just doesn't like the color of their vote. And so it's a vicious attack, but it's still using Ku Klux Klan methods. I'm sorry, does not make Charlie Kirk a great rational guy. You know, like I almost threw up listening to, hearing Peggy Noonan say, oh, well, he brought rational discourse to America. He made no. When you are on a campaign to remove people of color from the voter rolls, that's about as anti-American as it gets. I don't know whether you call it hate speech, but I'll call it vicious racist action. He may not be a racist, may not have been a racist internally. I don't know. He may have black friends. I have no idea. But so what? He may go dancing cheek to cheek with black people. But if he's taking away their vote, that is the worst, most violent form of racism that you can imagine other than lynching. It's electronic, electoral lynching. And that is vile and violent in my book. Does that mean you should get shot? Oh, my God, no. I don't want someone to say, well, I disagree with you, Palast. I'm going to blow your head off. No, please. Let's stop. No more bullets. No more bullets. Right, left, center. No more bullets. Okay, we can't win an argument with bullets or fists, please. And that's a serious plea. And there's no joy in that, and especially there's no joy in seeing someone with kids die. That's not how we got to win this battle. We have to win it with our force of our heads, our words, our actions, our nonviolent actions. And damn it, one thing, if you're listening to this show, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. I'm going to ask you to check your registration. Go to vote.org and see if you've been challenged, if you've been purged from the voter rolls before the 2024 election. According to the U.S. government, no one checks these figures. I do. 4,777,000 people were removed from the voter rolls. And I can tell you, I went through those lists, 66% wrong. I had the best statisticians in the country go through this material. I used to teach statistics myself. So Trump won the election by removing voters he didn't like. And we're just at the beginning of that. And that's the dangerous thing. And the problem is Bobby Kennedy was a voting rights advocate. How could he stand there next to that man who is mass challenging voters of color? His father, he used to say, it was kind of creepy. And I understood because he had his mental issues and, he went through trauma. And what I've learned of trauma is that mental trauma is that if something happens to you, like when his dad was shot in front of him when he's 11, you tend to revert to that speaking when you're 11. And he would suddenly become a little boy and talk about his daddy looking at him from heaven and watching him. Well, hey, Bobby, if your daddy's looking at you from heaven now, what do you think he's thinking?
Exactly.
What do you think he's thinking? He literally, his father saved Martin Luther King's life. Not many people know this story. King was arrested in Georgia, and they knew he was going to get lynched. And the family, by the way, Daddy King had endorsed Nixon against John Kennedy for president. The King family were long-term Republicans and friends of Richard Nixon. So they called their buddy Richard Nixon, and Daddy King said, my son's about to get murdered, lynched. He's in the control of the Georgia police, which is the same as the KKK, and they're going to kill him. Please do something. And Nixon said, well, the election's in 2 weeks. I can't do anything now. Unbelievable. And then so Daddy King called Harris Wofford, a friend of the Kennedys, who called Bobby. And Bobby said, I'm going to save his life. And he called his brother John, and John said, "Jesus, we'll lose all these southern states if we save King's life." And Bobby said, "We have to." He said, "Yeah, do it." So Bobby called a judge in Georgia, and they knew Bobby was going to be in charge as Attorney General. They call a judge in Georgia, and they say, "You better get King out of there," and he did. And he saved Kennedy. He saved Martin
I
Luther
don't think
King's
that's a
life.
well
So
known.
imagine
Yeah.
what King would say. What King would say to Bobby Jr. now. What would his daddy say to Bobby Jr. now? This is sad. This is horrible, and I wouldn't even bring it up. He's a friend, or he was a friend. Because my friend is gone. It's like my friend mentally died, and there's this other weird guy in his place who's turned orange. How do they all turn orange, by the way? What's with that, Bobby? Why you turn orange?
Yeah, I mean that it is sad, right? It is sad, but you know what? And by the way, I didn't know that story that you just told. This is the
Yeah.
first time I'm hearing that story. Is that a well-known story, or is that just something
No,
Bobby told you?
but I am a friend of Martin Luther King III. He's
Huh?
the one who told me about gave me that story, and then I checked it out. Checked it out with Bobby, and checked it out with others, and it is absolutely 100% true. And in fact, that's the reason John Kennedy won the presidency, because Daddy King wrote a pamphlet. They printed 500,000 of them, and they went to almost every black church in America before the election, saying, "Please, you can vote for the heartless candidate Nixon, or you can vote for the man with the heart, the senator from Massachusetts."
And
And that turned Illinois and Michigan to the Kennedy camp, because he was going to lose that otherwise. Instead, remember, you had a lot of African Americans who were voting Republican
was
because Jim
yeah,
Crow was the Democratic Party thing,
oh yeah, oh yeah.
and
In
so
fact,
yeah,
yeah, but in it the black people had an affinity for the Republican Party a lot of times because of Lincoln and all that
yeah,
kind of stuff in the past. So I mean, that switch occurred at the same time the Democratic Party also became the party of the Dixiecrats, etc. But anyhow, give me a closer. First of all, about Bobby, and also what's in the future for you.
Okay, well, number one, go to gregpalast.com. You can read the article. I was with Bobby Kennedy Jr. when he lost his mind. That's gregpalast.com. Also get the film Vigilantes, and my continuing reports. And I'm now working with the DiCaprio family and Robert De Niro and others, but most important, working with the Osage Nation, the American Indian tribe that was a subject of the film Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm doing the sequel as a documentary. And we're going to tell you this film, if you go to gregpalast.com, the teaser is that it's all about the origin of the Coke billions, the purloined billions. You know, that the Cokes, you'll find out the Cokes made their first billions by stealing it from this tribe, stealing $2 billion worth of oil. That's how the Cokes became the rich powers they are, by stealing the good old fashioned American way, stealing it from the Indians. And so that's what I'm working on. You get more of that information at gregpalast.com, and stay with Egberto, because where else are you going to get this stuff? Where else are you going to hear this? You ain't going
Thank
to
you.
hear it anywhere but on Egberto and a few very good progressive outlets. Like, I do work with Tom Hartman very closely, one of your buddies. And I have to say that what a privilege to speak with you again.
Well, look, I appreciate you being here, Greg. Before you go, Jules says, Greg, we also need you to investigate the 2 lynchings in Mississippi. And I'm sure you've heard about those. Look, I want to thank you for all the work that you do. Folks, Greg is not only at his gregpalast.com, but he's now also on Substack.
Yes,
Greg
please go
Palast
to Substack.
investigates. Greg Palast investigates. Look, before I close, we have to support all of these independent media channels. Why? Because, again, the mainstream media they have already acquiesced to everything the Trump administration wants.
That's
So,
right.
folks, we've got to keep a vibrant independent media. We want to thank Greg Palast, an investigative reporter that has worked with BBC and many others. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the work that you continue to do. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
See you in Substack. Thank you.
I want you to listen to Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom decided to tell an unfortunate, or I should say, an inconvenient truth. Even the rank and file not the rank and file Democrats, even the little bit left of center Democrats and the neoliberal Democrats, they are consistently trying to tell you that the ilk comprised of Bernie Sanders, Sorhan Mamdani, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and all these progressive folks, that somehow what they want is apples, pie in the sky, something that's unattainable. But Americans can't buy it anymore. After all, you take a look at the movement of our cash, the movement of our capital away from us to the select few. Of course, something has got to change. And we are coming close to the breaking point with 20 million people who used to have insurance losing it all in the next year or two. When you start to have nothing to live for, what is there? Listen to what Gavin Newsom had to say, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Let's move to California Governor Gavin Newsom with you, Jim, who has some advice for Democrats. Listen to what he says.
We have to be more culturally normal. We have to be a little less judgmental. We have to be a party that understands the importance and power of the border substantively and politically. We have a party that I think needs to design and develop a compelling economic vision for the future where people feel included, to reconcile the fact that if we don't democratize our economy, we're not going to save democracy. We have an economy that is broken for too many people. And I think that's foundationally and fundamentally what Trump understood. It's what people like AOC, Bernie, and Mamdani understand from a narrative perspective. But the policies that shape that, I think, will also shape the comeback for the Democratic Party.
You know, when Gavin Newsom articulated the names, Zorhan Mamdani, when he articulated the name AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when he articulated the name El Señor, my guy, Bernie Sanders, I had to do a double take. Because we know that under Gavin Newsom, when there is a veto-proof legislature in California, that they made Medicare for all practical purposes go up into smoke, or some form of Medicare for all go up into smokes. So that he is now saying, oh, it seems like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Zorhan Mamdani is what we have to be concerned about, that affordability crisis. These guys have been preaching this stuff for decades. Bernie Sanders for over 50 years of what really needs to be done in this system. And you know what? Many of us know what needs to be done. But when the masses figure it out, and I tell you what, I'm starting to see the masses figuring out that they need to take back that which was legally stolen from them. Notice I said legally stolen. The whole economic paradigm must change, bias towards we the people. Let's get busy. Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Today I have a special guest, somebody that's been with us before. I'm here with Tom Sarnik. In his retired years, Tom has become what I call a poet, an author, and an activist, and quite a bit more. How you doing today, Tom?
Oh, I feel great seeing you again. Well, I've been in the shadows watching you and listening to you in the morning. So I feel like I'm connected to your program. I haven't really gone away, but I haven't identified myself as much as you probably would like me to. And I haven't been writing as much poetry lately. I've been writing articles for Daily Kos mainly. So that's what we want to talk about today, too.
Yeah, I've seen that you've written quite a few articles at Daily Kos, but let me just tell our audience, as you know, Politics Done Right, we have a lot of audience participation, both in chat, phone calls, and people even send me emails. And Tom is one of those that he's participated in all three: phone calls, emails, chats, but there's something else special. He is our, what I call our poet laureate, because he sends out and he puts out some great limericks that have great presence for any particular day. In fact, I don't think we've gotten a limerick from you lately, Tom.
Right. I haven't been writing limericks. I've been trying, actually, off and on. I don't know. I don't see as much humor going on. It's a little tough to make a limerick about Charlie Kirk, for one thing. I mean, that's pretty sad. So, I mean, it's, I don't know. I guess I lost my inspiration a little bit because of the dark side that's been in the news lately. But I plan on doing some more. I will. I got some ideas. So I hope to get something to you soon.
Well, the limericks that you gave, a lot of times you've taken a lot of negative stuff and made it humorous. In fact, you get quite a bit of claps when you do it on from our Substack audience whenever you come out with one of those limericks. But there's a concept that you have called creative writing activism, and I think the limericks fall right into that domain as well. So why don't you tell me about what you, as a writer, and I really want to stress that as a writer, what you think is your contribution with what you call creative writing activism?
Okay, this is something new for me, because I've been writing this journal. It's called Corona Notes since May of 2020, and I have about 450 pages written. And until recently, I only read it or submitted parts of it to close friends, and they liked it. And one of the ladies that was listening to what I was reading and kind of liked it said, well, why don't you publish it? When are you going to publish it? And I kept thinking, I don't know, if I should, because I'm a little bit nervous about that. What if people get the wrong idea? What if I get harassed? And then I came across Daily Kos and or Kos, whatever. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Ordinary people, it seems, are submitting articles or stories, and they call them stories, and they get published. And they don't necessarily get a lot of likes, or it doesn't go viral. And I've got some. But the point is you're out there. You're putting yourself out there. Now, I did one thing that to kind of calm me down a little bit about doing that. I took up a pen name, and the pen name is John Quill, JONQUILL, so that I wouldn't necessarily be identified directly with my writing. So I've kind of chickened a little bit, but it has an impact. And even though it maybe I might get 20 people to look at it or whatever at one time, it's like you feel like you're doing something. You're putting something out there. You're putting part of yourself out there and letting people know that you're on this side or their side, and you want to be sure that other people that have the same thoughts can do the same thing and encourage them. So my goal today, if anything, would be to encourage your listeners, your people in the chat, or people that call in, think about maybe submitting something online to Daily Kos. And I'm sure from listening to people talk to you and the writing in the chat room, that people have a lot to say. And what I like about Daily Kos or Kos is that there's no word minimum or maximum. I mean, I've seen articles go on and on and on, but a lot of articles are just a few hundred words, and they're great. I mean, they make a point, and that's it. They're done. And I think that's fantastic. You don't have to be an author. You don't have to use all kinds of big words and things. You can just say what you're thinking and put it out there.
It is amazing because, believe it or not, I find that a lot of times just reading what people put out there is a catalyst for my programs.
Oh, good.
You have been a catalyst for my programs many times. And the reason why, again, is we are trying to have some sort of an interconnection with people. And I think that is what's really missing in our society today. This rugged individualism that some preach is just a way of keeping folks apart. And when folks are kept apart, they think there are differences that aren't really there. And I think a lot of if you take a look at your writings, I've published some of them on politics, politicsdoneright.com, and you place some of them out there as well. We have quite a bit of your limericks out there as well.
Yeah, I need to update that. Yeah.
Yeah, so and now that you found Daily Kos, which gives you that that unique audience with those journals that you write out there. I think they call them, is it journals they call them? I think they call them.
They call them stories.
Diaries.
Oh, there's diaries. But a lot of them are stories. They call stories too. It's like a story, but it's not a fictional story. It's a true story.
Right.
And they watch. They have an editorial staff that watches what you're putting out there, so you don't do something that's way off base. I've gotten a couple notices.
You have?
One of my articles, I use the term maggots, MAGATES, and I couldn't figure out at first what I did wrong. They blocked me, and so I had to write to them. I said, "What did I do?" And he says, "Well, look at your first line." So I looked at it and said, "Oh, they didn't like that. They have a policy that you're not supposed to attack people, especially groups, with some kind of name or something like that. They don't have a problem with you attacking political figures and making funny names and stuff like that, which I sometimes do. But it's when you start putting a group and you're saying everybody's in this category, they don't like that. And I can understand that. I don't want to be called a libtard. So
as long as it's done fairly, I remember being hit at Daily Kos before, and I actually went all the way to the top and said, "Hey, guy, this is actually factual." And it was like, "Yeah, I agree with you, but we have a staff now that actually goes through and,
they look at it. Well, I was glad somebody was looking at it. I thought, wow, the editorial staff is really, they're reading what I'm writing. That's anybody that's a writer, I don't really have a goal of selling lots of books and stuff like that. And this is free, Daily Kos is free. You're not getting anything for it. You're just getting, the thrill of having something published. So, that's the real thrill is just having somebody read what you write and feel that you make a difference. And that's why I thought calling it creative writing activism, might perk up some other people to try their hand at it.
Actually, describe what you, when you say creative writing activism, I mean, a lot of people can't go onto the streets. And, and I think if I understand your meaning correctly, it is like, but you have other platforms that you can actually make yourself be heard, right?
Well, this is the main one. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you still have WordPress and you have Substack now, and I can put stuff out there, but I'm never sure who's reading it and how many and what impact it's making. That's what I liked about Daily Kos. You're getting some feedback, and it just encourages you to go and keep doing it. But if you're just sending stuff out, and let's say you're writing a letter or email to the congressman, or you're sending out letters to different groups, and if you don't get a response, you're thinking, well, what's the point? I'm not making a difference, and maybe I shouldn't be doing this if nobody's going to acknowledge. And it's just a thrill to get even one or two people saying, "Oh, that was good," or "I'd recommend that," or "Here's a comment. Maybe I didn't like it," or "I have something to add." But you're like you do with your chat room, you're getting some feedback. You feel like, okay, people are actually paying attention, and that's good.
That is so important. You're right about that. One of the reasons I am, and it doesn't matter how many people I eventually get, I'll always have that chat feature, and not only have the chat feature, but the chat and the phone, the emails features, because I want the feedback. And it doesn't, the truth of the matter is, let me just say one thing. When you write on places like Daily Kos, or even if you have it on my politicsandright.com website or whatever, I can tell you that most people, because we can actually see the metrics behind the scenes as far as how many times that article was pulled up, how many times, so we see that. And the fact of the matter is, when you put on those platforms, your article is pulled. Right.
Okay.
The thing about it is that most people pull an article, they read it, they don't like it, they don't put a comment on it. In fact, I read a lot of things, and I am trying to be better at it, in that I acknowledge that I like the articles that I'm reading, or I am trying to teach myself, or I shouldn't say, I'm trying to get sufficiently disciplined to put feedback, because just listening to what you just said, it gives me even more impetus that I need to go ahead and do that, because you just said it, right? When you put something out there, you want to know, is somebody actually seeing it or not? And while we can see the metrics behind the scene, you can't. So it is good for us to acknowledge it with the likes and the commentary.
Yeah. Well, let me give you a couple examples of the creative part of creative writing activism, because that's what really appeals to me. It's not so much just telling a story about what's happening in the news and that everybody's read. It's like thinking. You talk about critical thinking. You're always trying to write something where I'm stretching the boundaries of my thought process and trying to, challenge myself and other people. And one of the articles I wrote is called "I Am Spartacus." And what I did is I compared the movie Spartacus from 1960 with the movie Superman, which was recently came out. Mm-hmm. And the main thing that I came up with was that I was really impressed with the political part of a Spartacus movie. I don't know if you're aware of it, but at the time, there was a lot of blacklisting of writers and directors and things. And Kirk Douglas decided that he wanted to make this movie and give credit to the people that were blacklisted, that were writing this movie and producing it. And he got into all kinds of trouble for it. And and the ironic part of it is the movie itself, I Am Spartacus, has to do with people speaking up against authority. The big scene in Spartacus is when the Roman centurions were looking for Spartacus, who had been a rebel against the Roman Empire. They thought they had him cornered, and there were a bunch of people, but they didn't know which one was Spartacus. So they went to the rebels and they said, "Okay, if one of you will turn in Spartacus, you'll be free. You won't be a slave anymore." And what happened was they looked at this Roman centurion, and one by one they said, "Well, I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus." And they all said, "I'm Spartacus." And, the Romans were like, "What? We can't tell who." So they ended up crucifying all of them. Mm-hmm. But the point is that I thought about this and I'm thinking, wow, what a lesson for today. I mean, I don't know whether this is going to happen or not, but I suggested the possibility that maybe with this the ICE raids and abductions, we need more people standing up and saying, well, I'm an immigrant. I'm maybe speaking Spanish and say, no hablo español, no hablo inglés.
No hablo inglés, yeah.
Yeah. And then I want my lawyer. I forgot the word for lawyer. But anyway,
mi abogado.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's kind of bold. I know, and maybe they get really mad, but maybe we need a group that does that more and more. It's a nonviolent form of protest. I'm sure it would make them mad and they'd arrest a lot of people, but it would get a lot of attention and maybe it would change things. I'm not sure, but that's my thought.
Well, actually, it would change things. So when you get 3.5% of the people activated, you actually get a change. So I think a lot more people need to be doing it. It's amazing because if you take a look at what happened with Jimmy Kimmel, how that came back, that was the pushback was hard. I wish we pushed back hard like that on a lot of other things, right? Not just entertainment.
Yeah. Well, the other one I did recently, which it was different because I never saw this published before. It wasn't an article, really. It was a one-act play I wrote called Jesus, Heyzeus, and it was, of course, a reference to Jesus at the same time. But it's
us,
yeah. In fact, I've heard that before used, But I was making a point in this very strange play that, first they come for this group and then they come for the next group and then they're eventually going to come for you. And that was the point of the play. There was if you look at Jesus look for it. I made an AI picture. That's one of the things too. I don't use AI for writing, but I do use AI for pictures sometimes. And I was able to make a picture of this big pair of orange buttocks on the stage, which represents someone we know in the highest office in the land. And these people were being pushed into this crazy the butthole of this big statue almost. And it was and I had a lot of fun writing it. And I kept thinking, one of the things I came up with was a group of people that had these big eyeballs. They were like ceramic eyeballs on a stick. And they were looking at everything that was going on. And they were the Nazis. Mm-hmm. But they were looking at everything. And I had fun playing with that word and all that. And I've heard it before, but the idea of big eyeballs looking at it was looking at the end of this play that's looking at the audience. And the audience is supposed to be a little bit nervous by the end of the play because maybe they're coming after you next. So that was interesting. That just the way that came out. But that's part of the creative part of it. So you don't necessarily have to write a story. You can write a poem. You could write anything that's interesting.
Well, you wrote another one called The Department of Defense X.
Oh yeah, that's the latest one. Yeah, war. Yeah, that was an interesting thing. And again, it was like it just struck me that now when you read the Orwell's book 1984, he plays with that with the different agencies in the government Oceania and the country Oceania where. The Ministry of Truth is actually putting out lies, and different bureaus do the opposite of what the name says. But then I thought that's called doublethink. But I thought, well, why not make it triplethink? In other words, make the description or the words used for the bureau or the agencies exactly what they do, especially today.
Right.
And actually, Trump. It's interesting. He changes the Defense Department into the Department of War, which I think maybe that's not a bad thing because you're actually saying he's signaling you what he wants to do with it. So we should pay attention what he changes the name. See, I thought of the Department of Labor as being the Department of Management, and all these different, Internal Revenue Service would be the refunds to the billionaire service, that type of thing. So you can play with those words and you can make something out of it that will make people sit up and think, well, whoa, maybe we should be paying attention to words and names. And the other thing I did in that article about what it's called, what's in a name, because that's from Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, is I took the word conservative, and I think I talked to you about this too at one time, but the word conservative, and I hear this word used for the right wing, I call them right-wing radicals, regressives. I think they should be called regressives. But the conservatives are not really conservative. We're the progressives. We're the conservatives. We're trying to conserve what FDR did and what has been done over the decades to improve our country with all the different Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all the different programs that help people. And we are trying to conserve. We're trying to conserve the air. We're trying to conserve the earth. We're trying to conserve people that are poor and sick. And it's like, yeah, we're the conservatives. So I played with that a little bit too.
You also played with something called a Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh, I was playing with the word peace, and I can't remember exactly what I said, but I think that Trump should be given some kind of award for just to keep him quiet.
Well, here's what you said. You said maybe it was to spite his Wall Street critics that Taco Man decided to get off the fence for once and give the green light to the GOP hawks at bomb the hell out of Iran. Actually, several big, beautiful bombs were dropped on few Iranian.
Yes, big, beautiful bombs. See, I don't even remember. That's the other thing about writing. A lot of times I don't remember what I've written until I go back and look at it. And sometimes I'm going like, whoa, did I write that?
That was a good article.
I'm going to give you a second here.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it, again, when you talk about creative writing activism, as you're thinking about this and you're thinking about how can you paraphrase certain things, etc., it does two things, right? It does something for you, and it also does something for the others who are reading. I mean, the stuff that I write is so damn serious. And so, I mean, every now and then, it's not like you want to leave the politics, but you want to have a little bit of fun as well. And that's what I find in a lot of the stuff that you write in here. And not only that, it makes you think.
Right. And I had another one called the two-cone choice. And this was kind of, I got some likes on that one, actually quite a bit, because I was really getting upset with people saying, oh, the Democrats are not doing this, that, they blew the election. And I said, the Republicans basically give you this choice. They put this thing out that looks like a really beautiful ice cream cone with two scoops on it, and it's got a waffle cone, and it's beautiful looking. And then when you try to taste it, it tastes like crap because it really is made out of crap. While the Democrats, they give you a plain vanilla cone or maybe yogurt, and it's healthy. And the people say, well, why should I make that choice when I can get this, great 2 scoops, 2 scoops.
Right.
But they don't realize it's crap until it's too late.
But, and that's why, creative writing activism. I like that. Well, look, we're coming close on our time. So why don't you tell me or tell our audience something? Why get into creative writing activism? And, how can they get into creative writing?
Yeah, well, I would say I would expand that notion from creative writing to just creative activism, because I don't want people to say, well, I don't have any talent, I can't write, I can't create art or what. But I would like to see more people thinking outside the box and just, whether they're talking to other people or you're chatting on your show or calling in, let's really go after different ways of going, changing our perspective on what needs to be done. Now, one of the things I came out with, and I can't remember what article it was, and I think maybe the last one. Oh no, maybe it's the one I'm working on. But I sent something to the Democratic Party, which is really making me nervous because they're not really. I'm afraid they're not going to be doing enough. But creatively, I thought, why don't we, instead of having all these protests all over the country, which, by the way, I'll be going to the next one on
October 16th.
16th, yeah, no kings. But why can't we do something in Washington, D.C. and surround the White House? And I was thinking, other countries that have overturned their authoritarian governments, they basically went around to the presidential mansion and they just stayed there. And they beat pots and pans, and they would, do all kinds of theater. And then I thought they could have these eyeballs looking over the fence at just make it uncomfortable for him. I mean, I don't want to just, make him feel threatened, but we need to be more active in that sense. So we can be heard. I'm afraid he doesn't care what people are doing in Detroit or Ann Arbor or whatever around here. But, I would like to see us, maybe the Democratic Party, especially with this shutdown looming, push for some kind of a protest around the White House. But whether it's possible or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the Democratic Party right now is far too quiet. I think they need to be doing quite a bit more. By the way, it's October 18th, the No Kings.
18th, okay, 18th,
October 18th. I want to make sure and not mess up that you haven't. But I agree with you. I think there's a lot more that we need to do. I think we need to be more present, and I hope we get there. But anyway, Tom Zornick, author, author, limerick. I'm going to also call you a creative writing activist, and we can throw a whole lot on you. Thank you, first of all, for being a great listener and watcher, supporter of all that we need to do to move forward, my brother. Well, thank you for having been on Politics Done Right.
It's been my privilege. Thank you.
Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It. As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto Willis. Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willis. This is a progressive program